Hi everyone, in this video we are going to discuss about how to find the solution for a trigonometric equation like absolute value of sine of x equals sine of alpha, where alpha is a given angle of course. For this trigonometric equation we have to find out what would be the value of x that would satisfy this equation. So let's get started. Let me first write down the original equation again. The original equation is modulus of sine of x equals sine of alpha. From the concept of absolute value function, we know that if we have an equation like this, modulus of x equals some number a, then we can say that x will be equal to plus or minus a. I have already created a separate video on the absolute value function. I have shared the link in the description. Feel free to watch that video. Now using this concept, how can we rewrite our original equation? Well, we can say that sine of x will be equal to plus or minus sine of alpha. So from here we get two equations, right? We get sine of x equals positive sine of alpha, and the other equation we get is sine of x equals negative sine of alpha. Now this negative sine of alpha, can we write it as sine of negative alpha? Because we know that sine of any negative angle is a negative value, so we can write it as sine of negative alpha. In a previous video we have already seen that the solution of x when sine of x equals sine of alpha is like this: n times pi plus negative 1 raised to the power n times alpha. And from the second equation we get x equals n times pi plus negative 1 raised to the power n times negative alpha. Wherever we had positive alpha, I have written positive alpha. Wherever we had negative alpha, I have written negative alpha. Now let's try a few values of n and see what happens. Somehow we have to come up with a combined value of x, right? So before we go too far, let's try a few standard values of n as an integer. We are going to try some integer values and see what we get. When n is 0, from the first one, what would be the value of x? Well, x will be equal to negative 1 raised to the power 0 times alpha, so that would be just positive alpha. Or we can say 0 times pi plus alpha. And similarly, from the second one, what would be the value of x? Well, here again it would be 0 times pi plus negative 1 raised to the power 0, that will be positive 1 times negative alpha, so that would be negative alpha here. Now let's try a value of 1. Then from the first one, x will be equal to 1 times pi, so that is pi, or I can say 1 times pi plus negative 1 raised to the power 1, that will give us a negative sign, so that would be negative alpha. And from the second one, what would be the value of x? Well, it would be 1 times pi, then negative 1 raised to the power 1, that would be negative 1 times negative alpha, so that would be positive alpha. That would be negative 1 times negative alpha, that will be positive alpha. Now let's try n equals 2. Then x will be equal to 2 times pi plus negative 1 raised to the power 2, that would be a positive 1 times positive alpha, that would be positive alpha. And from the second one, what do we get? From the second one, x will be equal to 2 times pi and then negative 1 raised to the power 2, that would be positive 1 times negative alpha, so that will be a negative alpha. So here we are starting to see a pattern. The pattern is that no matter what value of n we use, we are seeing that it's some integral multiple of pi, then plus alpha or minus alpha. So that means we can say the combined solution is going to look like this. Then we can say x is definitely equal to n times pi and plus or minus alpha, where n is an integer of course. And that is the general solution for this trigonometric equation, which is absolute value of sine of x equals sine of alpha. And the solution is x equals n times pi plus or minus alpha, where n is an integer. Let's take a quick example. Let's suppose we have an example like this, where the trigonometric equation is absolute value of sine of theta is equal to square root of 3 over 2. Now to solve this type of equation, what we need to do, we need to try and convert the right hand side into a sine function. And in this example, it's pretty easy. We can say then modulus of sine of theta is equal to sine of 60 degree, which is sine of pi over 3, because we know that sine of 60 degree is equal to square root of 3 over 2. Now once we are able to convert the original equation into a form like this, now finding the value of theta is pretty easy. I'm just going to use the same formula that we have just derived. So here we can say that theta will be equal to n times pi plus or minus alpha, but in this case what is alpha? Well, alpha is actually pi over 3. We can consider that as the alpha angle, right? That's the given angle in this equation. So here then in the solution I am going to write n times pi plus or minus pi over 3, and also we must make a note that n is an integer, and that is the general solution for the given equation, which is absolute value of sine of theta is equal to square root of 3 over 2. I hope everything made sense. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.